Good morning, everybody, and welcome to your final unit of World Lit. Today, I'm going to be introducing your last book and kind of what that unit will look like a little bit. I'm going to give you some updates as far as what the rest of the semester will look like as far as grading is concerned, the plan for the final exam. I'm also going to introduce our last book, Sold by Patricia McCormick, and teach you your first lit term for this unit. So lots to do today. It might be a little bit of a longer video, but all important stuff as we begin our last unit together. Okay, the first thing that you need to know about this unit is that though I sent you home with two books that we typically read simultaneously in this unit, Prayers for the Stolen and Sold, we are only going to be focusing on Sold by Patricia McCormick as our anchor text. Prayers might come in for some of you, and I'll talk about that later, but Sold will be our focus. Throughout the unit, you are also going to be watching the media that we typically watch throughout the unit, which is a documentary called Girl Rising. And when I show you the calendar in a second, you can see how all of that is spaced out. But these are the two pieces that you will be focusing on the most in our last unit of the semester. Let's take a look at the calendar. So what you see here is the rest of May and then the beginning of June at the bottom of the screen. Sold takes us through the end of May, and then what you see at the beginning of June is our seminars that are actually going to be a combination of Sold, our last unit, as well as everything else that we've covered this semester. So Behind the Beautiful Forevers, Zenzele, Never Fall Down, and Sold. So we're kind of using this opportunity that the school has given us as teachers to waive the final exam to combine all of this and help you to process the semester as a whole in a summative manner instead of a final exam score. And I'll get to the grading of that in a minute. But just so you know, that's kind of how the rest of your time will look, is like reading this last piece and then using that final experience to process and like really reflect on your time in this course altogether. So you'll see the reading of Sold spaced out throughout your time in May, and you'll also see that you will be watching some other pieces, and not everything that you'll be doing is represented on this yet, but you'll definitely be reading Sold and watching Girl Rising, that documentary that I just mentioned. And again, at the beginning of June, you'll be working with Socratic seminars in Google Meet, just like we did for Never Fall Down. And you'll notice here that the seniors are going to go first for Socratic seminar, and the juniors will go after the seniors' last day on June 2nd. And then you can see that the due dates are kind of broken up by whether you are a junior or a senior to kind of make sure that all of our T's are crossed and I's are dotted at the end of our time together. Typically in World Lit, you would take a final exam that consists of 3 parts. The first part was a Socratic seminar where you read this short story and then you kind of use that short story to talk about everything else that we've looked at and read this semester. The second part of that final was the lit terms final test, and the third part was a final reflection. So that final exam was worth 15% of the grade, and that all worked out nicely. But we have a new scenario to deal with, and the school has allowed teachers to really think about how best to assess you and to kind of make light of this weird circumstance that we find ourselves in. So because of that, I have decided to merge everything together that you would have done for the final with our final unit. And the pieces that you'll do for the rest of the semester, instead of being a final exam score, it will count as a summative pieces as your regular 18-week grade. So with that being said, to condense everything, I have removed a few things from your plate, so you will not take a Sold unit test, and you will not do a Sold mini project. You will also not do the lit terms final test, and the reason for that is though I feel like that list of lit terms is really beneficial, it's ginormous. And I don't feel like, rote memorization is a really good assessment of your learning. I would much rather see you apply those terms to the books. And in fact, you've already done that. So, because you've been assessed on those unit tests, I'm just going to not worry about that lit terms final. And I think most lit classes at North Campus are kind of following suit with that plan. So you do have some pieces left in the semester that will count toward your grade. So if you're worried about your grade, you do have plenty of opportunities to bump that up. The first being discussions 11 and 12. Both of these are formative grades and they are 5 points each. You will not have any discussions after that, except for the final reflection, which isn't really a discussion. So the next kind of chunk of things will be that final week for us where we're in our seminars. So you will have seminar performance. You will have a seminar prep document that will be a bit more involved than normal since I'm kind of combining it with what you would have done for the final seminar. And then you will do a final reflection. So those last 3 pieces are summative and will count for more in the gradebook than your discussions or your mini projects do. So again, at the very bottom, it just says sold unit assessments and final exam package will be combined and counted in the gradebook as regular summative items and not exam items. If you have any questions about this, please just let me know, but I can always clarify in our last couple Canvas conferences when we're all together as well. So that's the plan. Okay, with that, let's get into the last 2 pieces that we will look at this semester, and those are Sold by Patricia McCormick and Girl Rising, the documentary that I mentioned earlier. So you've already been introduced to Patricia McCormick, which I'll get to a reminder about her background in a minute. But at this point, I just want to kind of go over the basic background of the book. So I'm going to read the back cover to you if you want to follow along. Lakshmi is a 13-year-old girl who lives with her family in a small village in Nepal. Though she is desperately poor, her life is full of simple pleasures, like playing hopscotch with her best friend from school and having her mother brush her hair by the light of an oil lamp. But when the harsh Himalayan monsoons wash away all the family's crops, Lakshmi's stepfather says she must take a job to support her family. He introduces her to a glamorous stranger who tells her she will find her a job as a maid in the city. Glad to help, Lakshmi journeys to India only to learn the unthinkable truth. She has been sold into prostitution. An old woman named Mumtaz rules the brothel with cruelty and cunning. She tells Lakshmi that she is trapped there until she can pay off her family's debt, then cheats Lakshmi of her meager earnings so that she can never leave. Gradually, Lakshmi forms friendships that enable her to survive in this terrifying new world. Then the day comes when she must make a decision. Will she risk everything for a chance to reclaim her life? So this is a pretty hard-hitting book, and I'm going to kind of talk about what that might look like for you in a second, but I also want to give you a bit of background for Girl Rising. So Girl Rising is this great documentary. I really like showing it, and what's interesting about this piece is that it can be shown kind of in chunks throughout the unit, and that is how I normally do it in the class instead of having you watch it after you finish. So it's really this very interwoven media experience throughout the unit. So I'll read you what it says on the back of the DVD case. It says, travel the globe to meet 9 unforgettable girls, striving beyond circumstance, pushing past limits. Their dreams, their voices, their incredible stories are captured in a film about the strength of the human spirit and the power of education to change the world. Girls featured include Ruxana, an Indian pavement dweller whose father sacrifices his own basic needs for his daughter's dreams, Soka, an orphan who rises from a life in Cambodian landfill to become a star student and accomplished dancer, and Suma, who writes songs to help her endure forced servitude in Nepal and today crusades to liberate others. More than a film, Girl Rising is the heart of a movement that is spreading around the world promoting this powerful truth. Educating girls in the developing world can transform families, communities, entire countries, and break the cycle of poverty in just one generation. So what I love about this unit is it's very much an opportunity to look at different areas of the world while focusing on a couple tenets of the unit. So looking at education and the power that can really have in a person's life, regardless of where she or he lives in the world. It also does look at kind of how cycles of poverty can be broken, which is something that we've looked at throughout the entire semester as well. And some other pieces that have really traveled through our study this entire semester. So to me, this unit always feels very culminating and helps us to dig into some pieces that we've kind of been dabbling in a very pointed way. I've mentioned a few times now that Sold explores some topics that could be triggering for some of you, and I always want to be really forward and transparent about that right away because there have been a couple people in the past in my classes that really struggled with this piece for personal reasons. So you're going to see topics explored like coercion, manipulation, some violence, and also rape. So if any of those seem to you like they could be problematic and really cause you anxiety or to put you down a path that's really stressful for you in any way, please let me know today. Though I don't think Patty McCormick gets into any details that are super graphic, it still depicts scenes that if you've ever gone through something like this, could be triggering for you. So again, full disclosure, you may want to come and talk to me, you can virtually, I guess, email me or whatever, just so that we can kind of get on the same page and get you on a path for success here in the last unit. And I'm going to talk about an option for that right now. Though we will not be reading Prayers for the Stolen as a class, it could be a good option for you if you are uncomfortable with the content of Sold. So if you know for sure that this will be difficult for you to read, and we've communicated, what I'm going to have you do is read Prayers for the Stolen instead. Prayers for the Stolen really digs into what it means to be a girl in Guerrero, Mexico. There's a lot of drug cartels going on in this book. It's actually a pretty interesting read, and stylistically, it's different than what you've read so far in the class. I will admit that this is either a love or a hate book for a lot of kids. So you can take a look at it. I did send you home with it, so you can kind of think about whether or not this would be a good option for you. And then if you find yourself flying through Sold, which does happen because of the way it's written, and I'll talk about that in a minute, you could also kind of dip your feet into Prayers for the Stolen as well, because we would normally be reading both of these books simultaneously if we were sitting in the physical classroom together. So just know that that's an option, but please do communicate with me if you choose to read Prayers over Sold. I wanted to remind you a little bit about Patty McCormick's background. So this is a slide that I showed you with Never Fall Down. So it's the same information. She's a journalist and young adult novelist. She's written a number of books, one of which you have already read, which is Never Fall Down. She is the co-author of I Am Malala, and she obviously travels to research for her books. And for this one, Sold, she went to both India and she spent a considerable amount of time in Nepal as well. Okay, so we have been all over the map for our semester, and this time we are traveling back to the India-Nepal region. Sold starts out in the Himalayan mountains in Nepal, and then Lakshmi is trafficked over the border and into India, where the majority of the book takes place. If you end up reading Prayers for the Stolen, that is set in Mexico, just south of the US, in the state of Guerrero. Though I won't do a ton of background information yet in this unit, I did want to just highlight for you that trafficking, human trafficking, and sex work is very much an ongoing issue globally. And the Indo-Nepal border tends to be a pretty highly trafficked area, and this is exactly where Sold is set. So though this book was written in 2012, which is where the data on the table to the left begins, it's very much increased and ballooned since then. So though there are very many efforts being made by organizations in this area, it's still something that goes on to this day. So a lot of you were commenting in the last unit about how this felt very, the unit on Never Fall Down felt very relevant to you, especially when we looked at how COVID could impact those living in refugee camps. So just know that this problem of human trafficking is something that still goes on every single year in this area and is very, very current. One of the things that you noticed right away when you started reading Never Fall Down was the stylistic choice that Patty made in writing the book with Arn's dialect and really through his lens. And many of you commented toward the end of the unit on how much of an impact that made on you as a reader in terms of stepping into Arn's shoes and really understanding the concept of genocide through the perspective of a child. So Sold is no different in the sense that Patty has really made a stylistic choice to tell Lakshmi's stories in vignettes, which are short impressionistic scenes that focus on one moment that's especially powerful or significant. So if you have the book in front of you, if you flip through, you're going to notice that there is a lot of white space in this book. And the chapters, as it were, or vignettes, are very, very short. And as you read, that might have an impact on the speed with which you read this book. A lot of students comment that they tend to fly through this if they're told to read it on their own. So that might be the case for you because, as Patty comments, because these sections are so short, even though you're reading about a very heavy topic, you get to the end of a vignette and you're like, okay, I can read one more, and I can read one more after that because they're so short and spaced out. So anyway, an example I chose is from page 12, and what you see here represented on the screen is an entire vignette or an entire chapter called Another Calendar. And it says, according to the number of notches in Amma's wedding trunk, she is 31 and I am 13. If my baby brother lives through the festival season, Amma will carve a notch for him. 4 other babies were born between me and my brother. There are no notches for them. So you can tell that in this tiny little segment, Lakshmi is communicating something really significant about the culture and the lifespan of the people who live in this area, that illness and just, dealing with the monsoon and poverty and hunger can really make or break a child's life. And for her, she had 4 siblings that were born, but then they passed away. So Amma did not cut a notch in the wedding trunk for those children. So that monsoon season, the festival season, tends to be a marker of whether or not these children will survive. So even in these few lines, Lakshmi is telling us a lot about not only the culture there, but about her own family's experience living on the hillside in the mountains of the Himalayas. So the pro tip just says to think about the effect that this stylistic device or technique has on the storytelling in this piece. What effect does it have on the reading experience? And why do you think an author would choose to write in this vignette format? Okay, so that really does it for the background information that you need for reading Sold by Patricia McCormick. I hope that you enjoy this last unit. It will be formatted pretty much in the same way that our unit on Never Fall Down was. The only difference is that you will be watching the unit media, Girl Rising, as you're reading instead of after. And again, if you need to read Prayers for the Stolen instead for personal reasons, I can make an exception for you, but you need to talk to me or email me personally so that I know your reasons for doing so and that we are on the same page. That being said, pages 1 through 25 of Sold are due tomorrow, and have fun reading. See you later.